Often, art arrives in movements. Bauhaus architecture, abstract expressionism, French New Wave cinema, beat poetry, and punk rock, to name a few from recent history. These movements appear like a wave. Some artists are able to read the culture and position themselves to ride that swell. Others might see the wave and choose to swim against the current. Then, there are some artists who become the wave and transcend individual movements. Yayoi Kusama is one of them. The Japanese fine artist who became famous for her polka dots is the highest paid female artist in the world and the first woman to be awarded the Premium Imperial, one of the highest honors awarded annually by the Japanese Art Association. Her work has been labeled as contemporary, pop, surrealism, performance, abstract, and installation. But each time Kusama moves beyond the label and her work is carried into the future. Perhaps this is because Kusama defines herself as avant-garde, a French phrase meaning advanced guard or the part of an army that goes forward ahead of the rest. Her art pushes the boundaries of what is traditional, what is possible, and what has been done previously. Self-obliteration has become a central theme throughout her work, seen in the thousands of dots carefully painted one by one. And in a way, she has taken her ideas and artistic visions out of the physical and into the collective subconsciousness. This is the exploration of how Yayoi Kusama used personal branding to become limitless, pushing her art into global awareness, reaching the fame most artists have only ever dreamt of, and becoming an icon for liberation movements worldwide. Use this video as a study tool for your own brand or business. As the old saying goes, success leaves clues. Today, I'm revealing those clues and not only handing you the map, but leading you to the treasure. Our story will be broken down into chapters. This has been done purposefully to amplify a specific lesson. At the end of each chapter, I'll provide you with practical methods of applying the lessons in your own life. When it comes to your personal brand, it all begins with knowing your origin story. Yayoi Kusama was born in 1929 in Matsumoto City, Nagano. From the age of 10, she already had a strong instinct for what she wanted to do with her life. She had a calling and knew that it was to be an artist. From this point forward, she began painting all the time. Her early home life was not an easy one. Although the family was successfully financially, owning a wholesale seed business, there was a deep unhappiness that wove around them. Kusama's father would openly have affairs with other women, and her mother would send her to spy on him. When she would report back what she saw, her mother would often beat her in anger. Her parents were against the idea of making art as a career, instead wanting her to marry into a family of affluence as her sister had. When Kusama disagreed, her mother flipped over her paint set and told her, "If you want to paint, don't come back home." A psychiatrist at the time urged Kusama to travel to America, advising that it might be best for her to move out on her own. One of her favorite artists was the American modernist Georgia O'Keeffe, and having the great fortune of acquiring her address, Kusama wrote her a letter seeking advice on how to become a recognized artist. To her surprise, O'Keeffe replied saying, "In this country, an artist has a hard time making a living. You will just have to find your way as best you can, but I wish the very best for you." Before leaving, Kusama would burn up to 2,000 paintings by the riverside. It was an act of washing the slate clean. She committed herself to painting better works as she made the first step towards a new life. In 1958, she would move to New York City, which had quickly become the center of the art world. Upon first arriving, she went to the top of the Empire State Building and promised that she would conquer New York and make a name for herself. 13 years after the end of World War II, abstract expressionism had become one of the most prominent and accepted styles of art, and many artists were feeling the pull to step outside of what was expected. On one hand, there were artists moving from collage and assemblage to take on a more minimalist approach, and on the other, artists played with the bright, loud images of pop culture, causing art critic Lawrence Alloway to coin the term pop art. The art scene wasn't easy. As a single woman, Kusama had a great challenge in front of her. Women at that time rarely had solo shows and had to fight their way into the galleries. It was a male-dominated space. There was a struggle to get attention and eyes on her work. In the early years of living in New York, she was very poor, often finding assistance from well-meaning supporters who rented her studio space or allowed her to borrow equipment. Okay, let's pause here. In every story, there are three things: character, want, and obstacle. In Yayoi Kusama's origin story, we see the young Kusama as a kind of underdog character. Her want is to become a professional artist. It is all she dreams about and works towards. Yet, she has many obstacles in her way. Her parents didn't approve of her artistic ambitions. She must leave the only life she's known in search of something new, traveling to a whole other country to do so. And when she gets to America, she faces discrimination, sexism, and poverty. Success is by no means a straight line. The lesson here is that we all have an origin story, one that tells people who we are, why we do what we do, and what we have to offer. Discovering and owning your own origin story is an essential part of establishing a standout personal brand. To discover your own, you will have to spend time reviewing your history. What challenges have you faced in your life so far? What have you had to overcome? Similarly, you will need to explore where it is you're going and what you want and are striving for. It may be easiest to approach this task as an outsider looking in. Think of yourself as the character, taking a more objective view of your life and what has happened so far. Remember, you are the author of your own story. If branding is an act of discovery of finding the story that fits the person, then Yayoi Kusama was undoubtedly in the abyss of that phase during her time in New York. In the beginning, she dressed in modern fashion, wearing what was expected for that time. Yet she quickly realized that blending in wasn't going to get her what she wanted. She would need to stand out. Against the gray cement sidewalks and steel buildings of New York City, Kusama would begin to set herself apart by using the silk and vibrant colors of her culture. From this point forward, she would be seen wearing a traditional Japanese kimono. She understood the rule of attention, that it is better to be seen than ignored. Attention would enable her to meet more potential buyers, dealers, and individuals of influence. Attention and publicity would lead to more shows and solo shows at that. She did not travel all the way to New York to just fade into the background. Her artwork also began to take on new forms. Her infinity nets were large canvases with a solid background filled in through a series of brushstrokes that connected each other like a net. They reveal an idea of connectedness amid an infinite expanse. One of the net paintings was up to 33 feet long. Kusama was not afraid of taking up space. The publicity aspect of her work and her performance art was also on her mind. You can see this in her soft sculpture work. The boat, chairs, and couches covered in soft sculpture have the same obsessive quality as the net painting. For one showing, Kusama created a unique installation by taking pictures of the boat and projecting it onto the walls, floors, and ceilings. It not only brought the viewers into one piece of art, but into an entire experience. Another example is the unauthorized MoMA happening titled Grand Orgy to Awaken the Dead at MoMA. Kusama instructed nude performers to dance around the naked sculptures by deceased artists such as the late French sculptor Aristide Malloy. She wanted to make a statement, believing that the MoMA favored dead artists over the living, and that for an institution that prided itself on being modern, that there was nothing modern to be found. The museum shut down the happening, and the press quickly picked up the story, covering it in the daily news. It wasn't just one outdoor happening, there were several, all intricately arranged by Kusama to express ideas about love, anti-war, and inclusiveness. They were positioned in highly publicized places like the Statue of Liberty and the New York Stock Exchange. Everything she did was original. Quoted as saying, "I felt certain that the art of the future was not nude bronze sculpture, but the public was more excited about pop art." She also felt the pain of standing out and being an innovator. Sometimes it meant having to wait for people to catch up. The lesson here is that a personal brand is about drawing out and enhancing what is already unique about you. It isn't about being like everyone else or just going along with the crowd for the sake of it. In today's modern world, attention is a form of currency. Throughout your life, you knowingly or unknowingly receive moments of conditioning. This usually happens as we are growing up and our parents are teaching us how to behave in polite society. We're told to be quiet, use our manners, and dress presentably. None of these are bad things on their own, but over time, we may lose our sense of curiosity and stick to the accepted norms. The aspect of standing out when it comes to a personal brand is about, once again, discovering what is a little weird or different about us and being okay with it. We must also come to terms with standing out, as it may not come naturally for each of us. I'm a loud introvert. It wasn't always easy for me to be the face of a business or personal brand. In fact, it was the last thing I wanted to do. It was my previous business partner, Jose Caballero, that convinced me to join him on YouTube, and now the rest is history. I'm here 9 years later, running the future. Sometimes we have to step out of our comfort zones to grow and make a name for ourselves. As Robert Greene writes, everything is judged by its appearance. What is unseen counts for nothing. Never let yourself get lost in the crowd. Then or buried in oblivion. Stand out. Be conspicuous at all costs. Marty Neumeier, author, copywriter, and brand strategist, once wrote that brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, company, or organization. It is a feeling. It is, in a way, its own kind of art form. It is to touch upon a core string of human nature, pluck the chord of emotion, and play upon the mythical quality that makes it appeal to the masses, or to the specific group of people you've designed it to reach. If an artist can do so in a way that is also timeless, a quality and emotion that will be felt despite the age or the era, the individual will take on their own mythical identity. Kusama touched on one of these ideas and emotions early on in her work with self-obliteration and the feeling of being limitless.
子供の頃からあったね、その自己消滅という。そう同じの同じパターンのこと繰り返し。
Everyone wants to know true freedom, to live beyond the walls of time and space, to imagine what it would feel like to have no gravity, no physical limitations, and even no self. The idea of complete expansion feels like floating through the cosmos and begs the individual to question who they truly are. Are they one of the dots Kusama paints so repetitively? Are they the culmination of dots? Are they the space in between? By moving through this idea in her work, she didn't just play on the surface. She went into the depths of the human psyche, spoke beyond the ego, and found the limitless part that everyone keeps within them. Later, in 1966, she would travel to Italy to put her work at the Venice Biennale. This is where she would create and display her famous Narcissus Garden, ordering 1,500 mirror balls to be made in a factory in Florence. Arranging the mirrored globes in front of the Italian pavilion, she displayed a sign telling passerbys that their narcissism was for sale and they were invited to buy a globe for $2 each. She didn't just bring art to people, she made it about people. The myth of Narcissus is the classic Greek tale of human vanity. It tells of a beautiful man named Narcissus, the son of a river god named Cephissus. Whenever someone would fall in love with Narcissus, he did not show love in return, but rather he despised people and treated them poorly, as if they were lesser than him in every way. One day, a nymph named Echo saw him in the woods and fell madly in love. Once again, Narcissus wanted nothing to do with her. This caused Echo to become distraught, wandering the woods for the rest of her life until she finally expired, leaving nothing behind but the sound we now call an echo. When the goddess of retribution, Nemesis, heard what had happened to Echo, she acted to seek justice. She led Narcissus to a pool of water where he saw his own reflection and immediately fell in love. He could not pull himself away, ultimately causing the end of his life. The story has a timeless quality, a moral message to not get so caught up with your own self-image that you neglect those around you or stop living and enjoying life altogether. Regardless of the age, we can still in some way learn from the ancient myth. Kusama used timeless stories and topics to her advantage. By choosing a larger theme for her work like infinity, she would be able to find relevance with every generation, just like the ancient myths. How can you use this in your own personal brand? It will become an active discovery yet again. Think back through your life. What are some of the central themes? Try to whittle the theme and emotion down to one word. Something that will be universal, a constant. So long as there are human beings, it too will be there. Words like power, love, hope, obsession, creation, envy, and rebellion are covered in immortal themes. Take some time to explore different archetypes. See which one or two jump out at you and feel most like yourself. In the case of Yayoi Kusama, we can see the archetype of the creative and the archetype of the rebel, not fitting into the social norms or the time and staging elaborate happenings to make a point and stir up some of the emotions that lay hidden amongst the collective. Today we have brands like Apple and Adobe that play into creative archetypes. It not only reflects the brand's product, but also says something about its customers and the way they operate in the world. Begin with the idea of timelessness, something perennial, and stretch out from there, scanning your own life for clues. Like Yayoi Kusama, you may find your own word fits perfectly with the feeling of the age. World building is about creating an environment that is larger than just one person, larger than the creator, larger than the artist, and larger than the business. This is something that Kusama did better than anyone, and she let people into her world. She surrounded them with her work, and she allowed them to feel what it was like to be inside of the art, not just look at it. From an early age, Kusama began experiencing hallucinations. She experienced mystifying patterns, moving and multiplying until they engulfed everything around her, including herself. In order to cope with the trauma she experienced as a child, she painted her visions, and they became a way of letting people onto that part of her world. Often calling herself an obsessional artist, she painted polka dots on everything, including the bodies of other people. These dots portraying self-obliteration famously became her trademark, and today they are seen all over the world, including in collaboration with Louis Vuitton. Throughout the course of her career, Kusama also created more than 20 infinity rooms. They began as a way to multiply her soft sculpture work, as the task of sewing, stuffing, and creating these works was very time-consuming. She achieved the infinity effect by placing mirrors around the edges of the room so that as soon as someone stepped inside, they were instantly transported into another place where their own image amongst the backdrop of her artwork would go on for what seemed like forever. This brought the viewer further into her world, encasing them in what she had created, and again created this tie between the individual and the ego. Selfies with Kusama's artwork were, and still are, encouraged. One of the infinity rooms, titled Love Forever, was created in a hexagonal shape with mirrors on all sides. The viewer is invited to look through a peephole where they see both themselves and another viewer repeated into infinity. The idea of the work stood for civil rights, sexual liberation, and the anti-war movement of the 60s. It wasn't about creating a flat, two-dimensional surface. It was about bringing the imagery of an idea to the surface and allowing it to carry people away. World building is an act of vulnerability. It requires great strength to let people in and show them around the space you built. It doesn't have to be a physical manifestation such as the worlds and rooms Kusama built. It can be largely metaphorical, displayed through the language you use, the sceneries you create through the stories you tell, and the way you portray your own image. By creating a space in which you invite others, you can play upon your own history. Your city or the town you grew up in is part of your story. It allows you to play within the bounds of culture or create your own. When creating your own world, one for your personal brand, think about what you're inviting people into and what they're escaping from. The best world builders today are often authors and storytellers like George R.R. Martin or George Lucas. They create characters, cities, rules, laws, and cultural movements in fantasy fiction. Think about how people use social media today. Every profile is essentially an act of world building. Some do it better than others. If you can get intentional about your own world, you will begin to see others gravitate towards it. During Kusama's time in New York, although she fought to be seen, the establishment was not accepting of her. While other artists like Donald Judd and Andy Warhol rose to the top, Kusama was only used as inspiration and was not considered among the ranks of her peers. It was after long consideration and a noble attempt that she moved back to Japan in 1973. At this time, she drifted into semi-obscurity, checking herself into a mental health hospital where she still lives today.
病気のためにドクターのところへ行って美術の作品をねたくさん作ったことに言うと先生ともね素晴らしいと言ってくれました。
In 1989, the New York Center for International Contemporary Art staged her retrospective. This is when Kusama finally began to receive the kind of recognition she wanted and deserved for her art. 3 years later, she would be invited to design the Japanese pavilion at the Venice Biennial, where she created one of her fabulous mirrored rooms filled with dotted pumpkin sculptures. Today, the pumpkin sculptures cost upwards of $500,000 each. If we examine the photographs of Yayoi Kusama during her life, we see that for the first 2/3 of her life, she wore her own black hair and styled it with bangs that laid straight across the top of her forehead. She is photographed in Japanese kimonos and modern styles, and on a number of occasions sporting her dots. Around the turn of the millennium, we begin to see her style change, creating a more iconic silhouette. She begins to wear a red wig styled with straight bangs and a short bob. In every photo and in every interview, it becomes a very integral part of her personal style. From this point on, she is also dressed in pattern fabrics that imitate her artwork. And on several occasions, she sports sunglasses with dotted rims. Silhouette is the shape of an object or the outline of the object. It is not about being concerned with the details of a pattern, fabric, or piece of material. It's simply what kind of shape the overall image or object creates. When you can recognize a person based solely on their silhouette, not their facial features or anything else that might require a high level of detail, just the shape of their overall figure, that is when you truly know them or they have reached an iconic level of fame. The interesting thing is that you can construct a silhouette that stands out for yourself, just as Kusama did with the straight lines of the bobbed wig. Even your silhouette says something about you. When concept artists create characters for animated films, they don't draw the character first, they draw the shape or outline. To discover your own silhouette, put yourself in front of a mirror with a bright light so that only the shape of your body is showing. Allow the light to drown out the details. Notice the shape. What stands out to you? As you go about your week, pay attention to the silhouette of others and of the individuals you look up to. If you took away the details and just left the outline of your favorite movie star, would you still know who they were? If nothing about your own silhouette stands out to you at first, that's okay. That's why the exercise is suggested. It will take some time to develop this, but you can begin to play with different styles of dress and the way you carry yourself. Take the time to explore without limiting yourself to what you think your silhouette should be. Revisit the exercise over time until you feel you have found a shape that suits you. Finally, one of the lesser discussed aspects of building a personal brand is that you will need to withstand criticism. It is as natural as the sun rising in the east that if you begin to stand out, make noise, and grab attention, someone will come along and criticize you. During the 60s and 70s, Yayoi Kusama received her fair share of criticism, doubt, and even imitation both in the United States and in her home country of Japan. When Kusama created the photo projections of her soft sculptured boat, it was recognized by other artists who then began to do the same thing with their own shows. In one interview, she recalls, "After Warhol came to my 1000 boat show, he called to ask permission to use my patterns in his silkscreens, but I refused. I had been working with repetition for years by that time, ever since my 1959 exhibition at the Brada Gallery. Warhol's repetitions came from me, but my repetitions came from my childhood." Something similar happened with her infinity rooms. Just several months after the first mirror room, Luka Samaras, a Greek-American artist, showcased an immersive mirrored room through the Pace Gallery. Many believe Samaras had been directly influenced by Kusama's work, but she did not receive any recognition. While Kusama was busy arranging for happenings to take place to protest the war, her name became disgraced in Japan. The nudity and publicity of the events were misunderstood, and her name was removed from the alumni list of her local high school. The challenge of Kusama's work and life was the challenge of all innovators. Most of the time, people aren't ready to accept the change that these types of creators bring. One day, Kusama was so depressed that she jumped from a window and her fall was broken by a bike. She could have died and was quoted as saying, "If it wasn't for art, I would have killed myself a long time ago." Anyone who disrupts an industry, stirs up emotions, and makes people look at their own shadows will receive backlash. Kusama received what many creators receive: jealousy, envy, and the taking of inspiration without any recognition. Her response was to go through a period of what looked like exile, back to Japan, where she would continue to create art despite the vast amount of critics and bad publicity that followed her there. This is a lesson that we all must face. There are no real guidelines for making it through. Once you find your calling and begin to cement your personal brand, you must be strong enough to stand your ground. Much of the bad press or negative reviews will come from others who wish they could stand out too. Don't let them bring you down. Keep going, and you will reap the rewards of your individuality. Today, Yayoi Kusama is the most expensive living female artist in the world. In 2021, a group of 11 early works was sold at auction for $15.2 million, with paperworks being sold individually for upwards of $300,000. As of March 31st, 2023, Kusama will once again collaborate with Louis Vuitton to reinterpret a selection of signature pieces and unique artistic perspectives. The collection will reveal new creations adorned with original motifs such as pumpkins and figurative flowers. It took years for Yayoi Kusama to brand herself as the icon she is today. Sometimes the best brands take time. That is the beauty of the personal brand. It is ever evolving. By studying Kusama's history, we can learn the blueprint for discovering and then defining a brand that will live on. While most people hide what is vulnerable about them, Kusama put it on display. She invited people to experience her work instead of just staring at it. She played with timeless myth, a signature style, and despite rejection, she continued on, failing forward. If you take anything from Yayoi Kusama, take this. In your own personal brand, dare to be bold, dare to be original, dare to stand for something bigger than yourself, and never shy away from the unusual.